Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their advice. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. When I hear the phrase social skills, I usually don't get a good feeling because a lot of these skills I see taught within the context of social skills aren't helpful to autistic people as they aren't taught from an autistic affirming perspective. However, when I hear of an autistic person teaching these skills, I am interested to learn what skills they do teach and in what ways they do so to truly benefit autistic people. That's why I'm happy to talk with Mara McLoughlin to discuss teaching social skills, taking a neurodiversity affirming approach. Mara also talks with me about being appointed to the Oregon Commission for Autism and the Interventions Committee. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Mara, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Doug. It's my pleasure.
I wanted to kind of start out like I do with a lot of our guests and learn, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Well, that's a little bit of a loaded question. I knew about autism before I knew what autism was, right? Yeah, I mean, there was some family ties, the uncle that never left home but knew the dates of everyone's birthdays and anniversaries and would, recite them as his, way of interacting. And then just being twice exceptional in school and being observed a lot by different administrators and knowing that I was being observed but not knowing why. And then getting older, and in graduate school, I went to grad school as a speech language pathologist to work with people with traumatic brain injuries. And then I just got these, clients in the practicum lab that were autistic, and I was like, oh, wow, their minds, look at how they work. And I just became really fascinated and then felt like an affinity and moved into my career and noticed that, some of these really what were called, quote unquote, high functioning still needed a lot of support. And I was on the Autism Eval team, for various education service districts. I got to the point where I said, there's just dearth of services for people when they get older. And, everybody wants to work with the littles, right? And then they get older and they still have needs. So when the pandemic hit, I said, okay, here's my chance. And I launched this business, which brings us where we are today.
I was laughing a little bit when you said working with the littles, because that's kind of how I started out in supporting autistic people, autistic kids. And I always joke now, because my interests are more about supporting autistic teens and adults, that I just hate those kids. I mean, I just joking, but it's just to point out to people like there is so much support needed for us as we get into adulthood.
Yep.
So you mentioned being a speech pathologist, as in addition to that, you're the owner of IRL Social Skills. So when I hear the phrase social skills, a lot of times I get a little nervous because I think lots of times social skills are taught to autistic people that don't really benefit them. These skills aren't necessarily helpful. So what do you think are some challenges to teaching social skills to autistic and neurodivergent folks?
There are several challenges. The first being like, you don't, just because you might have good social skills doesn't mean you necessarily know how to teach them. It's like, how do you teach a fish to swim? Well, they just know how to do it. How do you teach someone how do you describe how to eat and swallow? There's actually a lot of steps to that process, but you just do it, right? The challenge is what happens typically is there's a focus on having students, put on their best normal and be okay. You just have to pretend like you're like everyone else. And how can you do that? Because you're not like everyone else. The skills, when people are on an IEP in school and they're taught social skills, the problem is, number one, they're not using an evidence-based curriculum. Number two, there's no parent training component to help with that generalization of skills. And number three, the dosage is way too low. And there's, it's like the way that we teach, first of all, we use an evidence-based curriculum. Second of all, we teach the parents. Third of all, the dosage is intense. It's a 16-week program. And the secret sauce is that these learners, teens and adults, get to be around other people who share their neurotype. And we know that autistic people do it different. And they have been, thus far, in an invalidating environment. We know that this culture, hates difference. And then they get to be around people with whom they share a neurotype. That in and of itself is very healing, because they're like, I fit in. That's the thing. You got to get in where you fit in. And there's a sense of, autistic people are awesome. You get to feel how it feels to be with other people with whom you share a neurotype, with whom you often share common interests. And you get to learn how that feels. And then you say, I want more of that feeling. And so I'm going to turn away from these people who don't acknowledge me, who invalidate me, who are teasing me, who are bullying me, who are excluding me. You know what? I've had enough of that. And I'm going to turn to these people who get me. And I'm going to use some skills to cultivate and maintain these relationships.
Now, I think, thinking about each person's neurotype in relations to social skills is really important. So, from what I understand, that is a component or a focus of what you do in teaching social skills. So, what does that exactly look like, that type of education for participants?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So, the first 15 minutes of class, our classes are an hour and 45 minutes long. The first 15 minutes of class, we are teaching about the brain. We are teaching about the autistic neurotype and the strengths. It's a strengths-based approach because you got to play to the strengths. It's no fun to be in a situation where here's something that you're not good at. Let's just keep on doing that because you're not good at it. That's just so deflating and discouraging. So we teach about the autistic neurotype, the strengths. We teach about just really structures and functions of the brain. We teach about how there are actually differences in the autistic brain, especially when it comes to the amygdala and the anxiety, which is really fear. That's the core emotion of anxiety, is really fear. And we teach about, ways to mitigate and cope with the anxiety using our bodies and using our breath.
Absolutely. For me, and I think for a lot of people, interoception is, I don't know if I want to say deficit, but it's definitely a challenge in our lives. And I think with social skills, rarely do I hear that interoception incorporated within that framework, but I think it's so essential. I know, within what you do, you emphasize interoception. So I'd love to learn, how do you incorporate that within the concept and framework of teaching social skills?
So, still within that first 15 minutes of class, we do a little brain education. Well, actually, first we meditate. We move from 1 minute to 5 minutes over the course of the first class is 1 minute, second class 2 minutes, etc., up to 5 minutes. We stay at a 5 minute meditation throughout the 16-week course. And within that meditation, we are really focusing on like what is happening with our breath and what is happening with our body. Like noticing the contact that your body is making with your chair or your bed or wherever you're seated. Noticing the air on your skin. Noticing the sensation of your clothing on your body. Noticing the coolness of the breath as it enters your nose. Noticing, just notice. And then we go into something, it's by Lindsay Brams. It's the emotion sensation wheel that she's created. And some people have seen different wheels like this, but the part that I just love about her wheel is the outer ring has physical sensations that correlate to emotions. And this is hard stuff. And interoception is difficult, especially for, just culturally, we tend to be neck up. And our bodies are so smart. They don't lie. And the body can only be in this moment, right now, doing this. The body can't be in the future. The body can't be in the past. So that is what is essential, is to build that awareness of the body and what is happening with the body in terms of like physical sensations, how they relate to the emotions, and just being able to sit with those experiences. Okay, what is happening? Something that happens in our classes, especially so cute with the teens. There are in-group calls or video chats that take place as part of the homework, and within the context of coaching by the parents as well. And they're like, what is happening to my body? I'm like, my palms are sweating, my heart is racing. What is happening? When they're having to first make these calls, and then they notice like, oh, that's the feeling of fear, because you're doing something different, and you don't know this person, and you're challenged. And then you notice on subsequent calls that those symptoms have started to dissipate. So, you get to notice, and it's experiential learning. You feel it for yourself, because no one else can tell you how you're feeling, but you can know based on your physical symptoms, if you will, what you're feeling. And this includes, feelings of joy. How does joy feel in the body? And what happens that parents report after their teens or young adults get off of these calls, which sometimes last, an hour. And parents are just flabbergasted, because they're like, wow, I've never seen my kid really connect with someone and stay on a phone call for this length of time, and they get off and they're really happy. And we encourage parents to say wow, I noticed that your face is bright and your body seems relaxed. Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel that can correlate to the emotion of happiness? So we work through the emotion sensation wheel. It's really scaffolded, and we model it as a team. I have a team of, including myself, it's 4 clinicians that run a class with no more than 10 families in it. And then we, tell a simple story. I was at my kickball game, and I noticed that it was the championship game, and I noticed that my fists were clenched, and my stomach was I felt kind of nauseous, and then we won the game. And then I noticed that my body relaxed, and I felt really warm and all over my body, and that was the feeling of happiness. So we scaffolded it out, and then we encourage parents to tell us a story like that, and then we finally move to our learners. And and to be able to talk to someone else about how you're feeling is a social skill.
Mhm.
And, we can all improve our social skills. That's the thing. As lifelong learners, and knowing that anytime you're interacting with another human, you're using social skills if you want to use them. But first, you got to know how to do them. And it's just skills upon skills upon skills.
I'm a big fan of the emotion sensation wheel. Just like an example for myself in my life is like many times I'll feel tense in my body, and I'm asking myself, why am I feeling so tense now? And then the emotion sensation wheel, it connects that to fear. And so it really can help me in some situations to unpack, well, wait a second, I'm fearful right now, and why is that the case? So I think it can be really helpful in my self-awareness and many of the things that you talked about.
Yeah. And not only that, Doug, but to say, okay, why am I fearful? And I'm going to honor that feeling. What can I do? What can I do with my body? I can do dots and squeezes.
Mhm.
I can breathe in deeply and then blow out completely. I can do that 5 times. I can do that 10 times.
What can I do to kind of change this thing, this fear? I don't want to stay in this state of fear, so what can I do to move beyond that?
Yes, and also, is my fear founded? And fear is a valuable emotion. It helps us stay safe. If there's a saber-toothed tiger, you know, over there, or even just like a dog, and I'm afraid of dogs, that dog might bite me.
Mhm.
So I need to keep myself safe. And is that fear founded?
And something else that you mentioned that I do practically every day is meditation. I know for some people they say, well, meditation doesn't help me, but sometimes it's the type of meditation you do, for example, and I think there can certainly be frustrations even when you have as much experience as I do in meditating, even every day. So I'm just wondering, within the context of social skills, you mentioned meditation. Maybe can you talk a little bit more about that meditation and maybe other like mindful practices that are incorporated with what you do?
So we just start our first class is just a silent meditation. We explain throughout the course of the classes that this is co-regulation. So because we know how it feels when we are dysregulated, we know how it feels to have somebody just be there with us, just breathing with us, and doing their own self-regulation, right? We know that to have somebody, talk to us in a soothing voice helps us. That's co-regulation. So we frame it as co-regulation, and we are all together, like as parents and learners, in the same room for the first 15 minutes of class. And we are co-regulating. We are getting our bodies, our breath, our minds prepared for this class. And then you also have these skills can help you with self-regulation, because we know that anytime you're in a relationship with somebody, there's going to be problems. It's just a fact of life. And being like, okay, so I know that I learned in class that when I'm feeling like upset about something, that I can take my breaths. I can practice different kinds of breath work, because we teach different kinds. My background is yoga, hatha yoga. Been studying that for seriously for 25 years. It is a practice that, I might, not be stable in my practice. I might have so much going on that I'm not doing my long practice. But you know what I can do? I can light a candle. I can stay for just 1 minute and just be without trying to be anything or anyone, and just be. I can do that. I can give myself that. And that just brings us into that self-compassion and that self-love, which, these are practices. And, the messaging that autistic people get is very invalidating. It's very, you're too sensitive. It's not that bad. Get over it. The messaging is pretty consistently negative, even though, within the neurodiversity movement, we've really made some really great strides in the past 20 years. And especially in the past, 2 years, there's just been an explosion around of awareness, of consciousness raising. And we still have a long way to go because there's still a lot of misinformation out there that has took hold. Don't get me started because I can go on and on about the absurdity around some of these myths around autism. So we need to combat those myths with our own, by shoring up our own self-confidence, self-awareness, self-compassion, and like I said, self-love.
Now, something that's really been important to me as this podcast has developed, approaching about 200 episodes, is I've really been interested in hearing more from non-speaking autistic folks, and have had several of them on in the last year or so. Something in relation to that, from what I understand, in addition to teaching social skills, you're passionate about working with non-speaking clients to learn how to communicate using AAC. So,
Mm-hmm.
so what do you think are maybe some of important things to consider when supporting someone to learn how to use AAC?
Oh gosh, that's a really big question. When I was working in the schools, that was my area of expertise, was AAC, working with non-speaking autistics. And the first thing to remember is to expect competence. Because just because a person can't talk, which usually is a symptom of apraxia, right? Just because a person can't talk, just because they can't coordinate the fine motor movements of speech doesn't mean they can't think, plan, make decisions. In teaching the use of AAC, it's not like, oh, here's a machine, now talk. There's a lot of modeling that has to take place. There's a lot of training of environments. And I think of it in terms of, when we look at child development and language development, like a typically developing baby who is in what we would call an enriched environment, an environment in which they are, getting an enormous amount of input, okay? And that is linguistic input. What do they come up with after a year of all of this input? Millions of words that they've heard over and over again. Mama. Ball. So the point being, it just takes an enormous amount of input, and you have to be patient, and you're looking at just modeling. If you want somebody to use AAC, you have to use AAC. If I want somebody to, use a device to communicate with me, I'm not going to just be using my own fluent speech. I'm going to have my own device. I'm going to be using it. I'm going to be modeling, and respecting that communication. And, communication, lots of times we're like, well, we want them to talk, we also want to know that someone is comprehending what we're saying. Because it's one thing to not be able to speak, which, in and of itself is very, very difficult. It's another thing to not be able to understand what people are saying to you because of the speed at which you're speaking, because there's no visual support, right? Verbal language is just, floating through the air. We don't have a closed caption thing on our chest, although there is some good AAC that is coming out that is, in terms of technology, that is going to bridge that gap of showing visual speech, just how we're watching the closed captions right now, Doug.
In the last year, you were given quite an honor as you were appointed to be a member of the Oregon Commission for Autism and the Intervention Subcommittee. So
Hmm.
I'd love to know what's been your experience with this commission so far.
So my experience with the commissions so far, it's only been well since January, so not that long. It's a 2-year appointment. The commission itself has been around for a while. It is led by a woman who has an autistic adult son, and her background is in as a health insurance lawyer. So yeah, there's, it's a real sad state of affairs in terms of assessment and then treatment and having it be covered. We know that what is covered is ABA. And, to get other services covered is really challenging. My style is okay, so there's a problem. I want to do something. I want to do something that works. And here I go. So working within the context of the commission, there's several members, maybe 15 members of the whole commission. So, our work is still in progress. It's interventions, strategies, and supports subcommittee. And, everyone is still really, there's a lot of learning that is taking place and a lot of trying to figure out, how to navigate in terms of moving legislation. Because that is, we are working at the state level trying to get, for example, there's like a 2-year wait list for evaluations, even for kids. 2 years in the life of a 4-year-old? Then, okay, so how are we intervening then? Okay, but they get assessed. How are we intervening? Is it in a neurodiversity affirming way? Are we training environments, or are we just, focusing on the student, if you will, or the person, the autistic person? So there's, it needs to be both. We have this, tendency to be, oh, well, it needs to be this or that. It needs to be both. And that's, in terms of what we do with IRL social skills, we are solving a problem. Because the problem is that there are a lot of really amazing autistic people who are struggling socially, who are human, right? And humans are social. We are wired socially. We cannot live without other people. Or it's like, I just thought of that show Alone. And there's a show where people are, out in the boondocks by themselves, out in nature, and they have to survive. And it is very, very, very difficult. We need each other. And I just have too many people who are not, they're socially isolated. And what happens is your mental health suffers. We know about the high rate of suicidality. And we teach UCLA's Peers program, which is a proactive approach to mental health. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to bringing more to the commission. I'm looking forward to just bringing more awareness around the importance of mental health. And when we talk about autism, we are talking about mental health. And we are also...
And Mara, beyond this interview, how can our listeners learn more about you and IRL social skills?
Well, you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, moving a little bit more into Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. There's not a lot on our YouTube channel. And, I just started this business in March of 2021. And it's, a single shingle, just me, just with I just had a dream. And I was like, okay, what are you going to do here? There's a problem. There's too many cool people who are disconnected from each other. We got to present something that actually works. And so we have had almost 100 families come through our program. So just check us out on those social medias. You can look at our website. We're actually doing a site migration. So our website is, it's still there. We still have a presence, but the new website will be up and running the first week of November, and it is a website that's going to be more suited to teaching courses, which is what we teach, workshops and courses, using UCLA's Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills, or PEERS, plus our first 15 minutes of supplementary education as recommended and kind of insisted upon by the actually autistic community, which is that, mindfulness, meditation, self-regulation, interoception skills, and neurodiversity affirming messaging.
Well, Mara, I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much for joining me and educating me a little bit, and hopefully many of our listeners on IRL social skills.
Thank you, Doug, for having me.
Thanks so much to Mara for the conversation. To learn more about Mara, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach provides extraordinary support to live self-sufficient and purpose-driven lives through our customized coaching? If this is something that you're interested in learning more about, please visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.